All right, here we are. Second video we're doing, answering your questions about British Parliamentary Debate. So, one of the other questions that has come up, again from Cade Akamu, is a question about spiking and how to use the concept of spiking in a debate round. Now, to give some context, the reason why this question resonated with me is because I was sitting in Cade and Josh's, I believe it was round 5 or 6 at Nationals, a round that I didn't really see the round the same way as the judges. Josh and Cade were on opening government. They gave what I thought was a pretty reasonable setup for the round. I had them at the 2. They set up a good round, but then they got shut out. The back half went off and did their own thing in ways that I thought were abusive. They deliberately in the back half shut out opening government's argumentation. Closing government just took a lot of what Cade and Josh did and relabeled it as their own, and closing opposition wouldn't give them any questions and wouldn't engage with their arguments. So while I thought the boys were probably second, I recognized that there was a scenario in which they got fourth because they got shut out and the judge didn't respect it. Not only did the judge give them fourth because they got shut out, she gave the round to the people that spoke last because no one engaged with their arguments, which is kind of dumb because in a British Parliament context, you can't vote that way because nobody can respond to closing opposition. They speak last, nobody will respond. If you use this judging paradigm, you're voting CO literally every round. So I didn't think the judge was that great, but I would keep my mouth shut when talking to the judge in feedback because that's how I was trained. I don't really trust myself to ask questions. Cade, on the other hand, is a lot more trusting, so he asked the judge, in the middle of judge feedback, how he could have engaged given that they didn't respond to his arguments and wouldn't take questions. She gave one of the great answers I've ever heard, not great in terms of useful, great in terms of hilarious, in that she said, you've heard of rebuttal. What you needed to do was pre-buttal. You needed to assume what their arguments were going to be and make arguments against them so you could, in your speech, so you could engage. Now, at first I kind of laughed about this because pre-buttal is not a thing. Really, it's not. But Cade, rather than just laughing at it, decided to take it seriously and realized that this was similar to the concept of spiking. So his question today is, how do you spike and when do you spike? And I do think it's kind of important. Minus the context of what happened in this round, which was nonsense. They deserved the 2. And pre-butting wouldn't have solved anything in this case because closing opposition was being deliberately screwy with ground. So but let's talk about it in the greater context of spiking because that is a useful application. What is spiking? Now, when I say spiking, I'm not referring to volleyball spiking, which is an offensive move that is aggressive and used to score points. Spiking in our context is like sticking a physical spike in a road to change someone's behavior, to have them go around or not go down this particular path. And if they do go down this path, to create a flat tire or cause some other harm. Think of it also like with the rental car agency, that they have those set of spikes that you can't take the rental car out, you can only bring it in. It's the same concept. You're putting up a barrier to prevent people from engaging in a certain kind of behavior or making an argument in a debate round. So a good spike comes out only really in the front half. You're talking about this particularly in deputy speeches, so deputy prime minister and deputy leader of opposition. It's particularly important for the deputy prime minister to spike if they're going to do so because this is the least interactive. The only thing they can do, the only interaction that they get is with one speech. They get to rebut the leader of opposition. So interaction is at a premium for them, and spiking can really change the game somewhat. Now, some cautions. Spiking is going to lead to a number of different outcomes. Either one, they will ignore the spike, plow right into it, and make an argument, right? This can be good for you because it will show you as being directly interactive with an argument that you expected them to make, and then they did make. Okay, that's one. 2, they can completely change up their game because they see the spike and take the debate in an entirely different direction. That's why spiking is hard in a 4-team debate format, because if you do spike effectively and get them to move in a different direction, and they have different material, that can really hurt you because it can take the round in a totally different direction and you can be shut out because maybe they hit on something great. The best case scenario is that they move to their second and third layer of arguments that aren't that good. So recognize that when you're facing a top team, spiking is not really going to give you much help because all it does is forces them to be a little bit more creative in their argument. So how do you spike? So an example of spiking came up in the last tournament for me at the America's Cup, where Sterling Higa and I were entered. And the round was a topic that I'm very familiar with. If you're on the UH team, I lectured on this earlier this year. Specifically, the resolution was this House would ban American football. So I was on opening opposition, and I was the leader of opposition. This is my favorite position on this topic, and my favorite position generally, my favorite speech to give. So it was a good speech, probably my best speech of the tournament. I made a lot of arguments. One of my more critical arguments was the reason why you can't ban football is for many poor communities, this is a form of economic mobility, and while it doesn't necessarily pay off in terms of everyone getting an NFL contract, it gets people into college that would not otherwise be able to get into college, gets them a degree. Note, I'm not saying education, I'm saying degree. And it gives people, even the ones that don't even make it, it gives them an alternative to gang life or other activities that they would do if they weren't involved in organized sports and the community didn't respect organized football as a way to advance oneself and something worth protecting. So it's pretty common that gang members will not mess with people that are athletes because that's viewed as a better life, etc. So these are the kinds of arguments I was making. Now, the economic mobility argument is a strong argument, I think, for side opposition in this round. It's probably my favorite argument to run too, because it goes counterintuitive to the exploitation argument that comes out from football, that as it came out in the round, these predominantly black bodies are exploited for people's entertainment. The response to that is they're compensated for it, and it's better than the alternative. Okay. Now, I knew, based on what the PM had said, that they liked certain sports better than other sports. And I would imagine that they were going for contact sport, less contact sports that were played more globally. They had mentioned soccer. Soccer's a really easy argument to deal with because in America we just don't have a soccer culture. But the next one I knew they would settle on is basketball. So I knew that I had to put a spike in for basketball, make an argument in advance, particularly because Sterling, my partner, I love him, is not going to be as knowledgeable on this topic as I am because this is a passion for me. So I knew I had to get the spike out, which would help Sterling in the LO. You could also have done it from the deputy, but we did it in the LO just because I was the more knowledgeable person on this one. And so what I said is, look, not only does it provide economic mobility, not only does it give people college degrees, one of the reasons why it has to be football as opposed to everything else is you have 75 college letters, so 75 spots on a college roster in NCAA Division I, as opposed to basketball where you get 12. So even if you say, okay, put our resources, basketball is sufficient, you're getting 5 times more, 6 times more players involved, and the benefits of economic mobility are 6 times greater in football as a vehicle as they would be in basketball. I was correct. They had to go to basketball because they needed to provide a sport alternative because they didn't want to say ban all sports. They did go for basketball, and Sterling was very easily able to pick up on this, as did the whip on our side, that the easy answer to their alternative is football is way better at providing the economic benefits. So they don't get full solvency on the economic benefits argument. They have to grant us some amount of impact. We were going to get it better through our means than theirs. And I put up this spike when I made the initial argument, which is one of the keys to spiking, is when you make your argument, that is when you put up the spike, right? So if I'm trying to make an argument that football is better than basketball in terms of economics, when I make the football is good for economics, I also say it's better than basketball, and here's why. So that's a common place you can put a spike. Now, I would say you want to be very careful. You want to limit exactly what you're talking about and make sure that you tie it to your specific point rather than saying something out of the blue. Like if I had gotten up and said, you know, by the way, the Colin Kaepernick example doesn't apply because Colin's not a football player anymore or whatever. He's an activist outside of it. That doesn't necessarily work because it didn't flow in my speech. A spike only works when it's tied plausibly to an argument that you are making. So that's what a spike is. It's a deliberate argument that your way is better than something you anticipate the opponents are doing. Now that I've shown how to do it and talked about how it works, let's talk about some risks, as I mentioned before, to further clarify it, right? You don't want to put up a spike in all situations. You want to put up a spike when you have a pretty good idea where your opponent is going. Another example of this would be if back half is asking a POI and you can anticipate the argument there, you can put an argument against it in your speech. Now, you may have to come up with this on the fly because they may POI you. Or if you're smart, they POI your partner in the leader speech and you do it in the deputy and it's fine. So that would be a good way to do it and to show your interaction. But recognize that if you guess wrong, you're going to lose massive amount of points because it looks like you're putting words in their mouth, looks like you're wasting time, etc. So if you're going to spike, you do it when there's a deficit of interaction and you're worried about that. When you know the best team is in the long diagonal, you kind of got to, spiking makes a little bit more sense, right? You're also not spiking your back half, you're spiking the opposition back half. So if you're trying to have, this will not help your back half take your arguments. So don't think it's going to be a panacea there. This is really only helping in the long diagonal. So spiking, can it be good? Yes. Is it going to be this massive pre-buttal that's going to save you from back half shutting you out? No. But it is a way of improving engagement, particularly if you have information about arguments that they will be running, or you have a strong idea that this is ground you need to get out ahead of. So if you have any further questions on spiking, let me know. But otherwise, that's a tutorial on how to do it, when to do it, and why to do it.